So we're using some form information and some control-specific information to show this error message. Of course, we can improve validation even further here. For example, we might want to mark the invalid inputs as invalid visually. And Angular actually helps us with that. If you inspect an input field that was registered with ngModel, you'll see that on there, some special CSS classes have been added. And these are CSS classes that are added and managed by Angular because we added ngModel on that input. And it's always in the end these three classes and their counterparts that are added by Angular. ngPristine tells you whether this email field has received any input from the user or not. So if ngPristine is added, it has not received any input. ngInvalid tells you whether it's currently considered valid or not. In this case, it's not valid. It would be ngValid if it would be. And ngTouched tells you whether the user at least selected it. So here it's touched. I have ngTouched on it because I did click in there, but I haven't typed a single character, so it's still pristine. And it's invalid because currently the value entered here doesn't meet my validators. The other input here, the password input, for example, is pristine and has also been touched and is also invalid. If I reload though, then you see that it has ngUntouched on it because I haven't tapped into it yet. And of course you can use these classes for styling. That's why I prepared a new styles.css file, which you find attached, which is essentially the old styles.css file, but it has some special validation styles added to it. Some special rules that in the end use the ngInvalid and ngTouched and so on information to style these inputs depending on whether they're valid or not and whether the user has interacted with them or not. So with these styles added, if I now reload and I tap in there and here, you see at the moment nothing happens because even though I selected them, I haven't entered anything. But if I now enter an invalid email, for example, you see that gets highlighted. And the same is true for an invalid password. And this special styling disappears as soon as I enter a valid value. If I reload and enter something for the first time, the invalid styling is only applied once I tap out of there, which is the behavior I want to have here. Of course, we can now also improve the error message and show more specific error information down here. So in the login component, we can check if the email has been touched and the email is dirty, which means the user entered at least some character in there, and the email is invalid. And in that case, I'll output invalid email address entered. And in addition, I'll output another control error paragraph where I'll check if the password has been touched. And the password is dirty and the password is invalid, in which case I'll output invalid password entered. Must be at least 6 characters long. And with those changes in place, if we go back, we still don't see those messages initially. But if I enter an invalid email address, I see the email specific message now. And if I enter an invalid password, I also see that. And that's arguably now a better way of giving the user feedback. Of course, if I enter valid values, those messages disappear, and I can submit my form and access the values there. This log, as you saw before, is coming from inside the onSubmit method. And we only make it there if the form is not invalid.